Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, back with another video for the new Boston. Now in this tutorial we're going to be talking about error reporting, and I'm going to be speaking a bit why error reporting is important during development, and then again why it's important to turn it off when you're not developing and when you're releasing software, or releasing code rather, onto a public web server for public use. Now let's take a look at what error reporting is. Now if I was to create a PHP document, and I've got my PHP tags here, and I was to say write in some invalid code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to make this equal to Alex, but I'm missing out the line terminator, which is a semicolon. So I'm missing that out on purpose. Now at the moment my error reporting is turned off. So when you're developing, you may find that your code will not run even if you have output outside of your PHP tags. So let's put this into practice in an example. I'm going to refresh my page. Now you can see that nothing has been returned to us, no errors or no output at all. Let's in fact echo this here, and we can demonstrate that we're getting no output whatsoever. Oh, we are. Okay. Oh yeah, okay. Well, we are because it's the only line in our code. So let's create another variable down here called Billy. Remember, PHP works on a line-by-line basis, so if you've got only one line in your program, you're not required to use a semicolon. But I'm going to put another variable in there as well, and I'm going to refresh the page, and you'll see that no content appears, whereas it did before. So no content appears, but no error message has been given. So we need to turn error reporting on to our select value of error reporting, our select, how can I say, settings, if you like, of error reporting. And I'll explain this in a minute when we take a look at our php.ini file. Now if you open up your examp PHP location where the PHP folder exists, for me this is c:\examp/php, and we need this file called php.ini. So I'm going to double click on this and open this. We've opened it in Notepad, and I'm going to go and find on the page error reporting. So now you can see we've come down to this error handling and logging place here. We have an explanation here of each stage, or each setting rather, of error reporting. So for example, if we were to set error reporting to E_all, this would report all errors and warnings, but not including E_strict. E_error, fatal runtime errors. E_warning, runtime warnings. So we have all these different types of warnings and errors that we can allow our user to see, or us as a developer to see. But by default, I think mine is actually set to 0. So let's go down. Okay, so we've got error reporting equals 0. And this is error reporting off altogether. As we've seen in our browser, we've not retrieved an error, or not been returned with an error, even though we're missing a semicolon. Our page isn't working. Now, it's also great to note that if we were to have outside content, outside of our PHP tags, this is also not going to be displayed. Now, you may have come across this before, where you've created a PHP document, you've had outside and inside PHP comments, so you've got HTML content here, and then you've got PHP content inside here, but you're just getting a blank page up. Take a look inside your php.ini file and check for this, check error reporting, and I can pretty much guarantee most of the time it's going to equal 0. So what we need to do is we need to change this to something that's going to give us back an error. And there's a few examples here, but we can create our own custom if you like. In this tutorial, I'm just going to be dealing with E_all. So you can say E_all. Now, bear in mind this doesn't equal E_strict, so we'll have a look at that in just a moment. So we've got E_all here. Now let's go ahead and save this. So save. What we need to do now is we need to restart our Apache server. So we come into our exam control panel, click stop, and click start. This may be slightly different for you. You might be using another package installation. Now what we can do is we can open up our browser and click refresh, and you can see that it's giving us our error back. So we're saying here pass error, expecting a comma or expecting a semicolon on line 4. So what we can do now is go over to line 4, and you might think, well, I've got a semicolon on line 4, but in actual fact it's referring to the end of this line, meaning it's expected either here or in terms of reading it, it's expected here. So when we fix this and we refresh, you can see that it's working fine. So we've got our outside content and our inside content. Now let's go back to our php.ini file and have a look. We've got error reporting currently set to eAll. So we are reporting errors back to ourselves as we're developing. Now what happens if I want to report errors, strict errors for example? Well, this doesn't include eStrict, so what I can do is I can specify to say and e_strict. Now what this is going to do is it's going to incorporate strict errors. So what we're talking about is code that might run, but let's have a look at the definition. It might run, but it's the runtime notices enable PHP suggest changes to your code which will ensure the best interoperability and forward compatibility of your code. So it's basically giving you messages about your code itself rather than errors that you might be coming across. So you don't need to include this, but maybe it's a good idea if you want that kind of error reporting to show. However, we've used this ampersand here, but what we can do is we can say, let's say eAll, and use this symbol to say well, we can say ampersand as well. We can say not including e something else. So we could say not including e notice. I've just noticed as well this example is actually written up here. So yeah, I wasn't looking at it, but coincidence. So error reporting eAll and e notice. So what you could do is you could specify it like this, which will show all errors except for notices and coding standard warnings. So it's not going to show it's not going to show notices, and the coding standards warning is the eStrict part of it. So remember, eAll doesn't show eStrict. Now if you wanted to show code standard warnings, so coding standard warnings, sorry, you could just do this. So you've got eStrict here. So it's up to you what level of output you want. You can mess around with this, and once you've got your application maybe built a bit bigger, you can turn this on, have a look, and keep it on anyway, but it's a good idea to fiddle around and see what you can come out with on this. Especially if you're getting a blank page, you can change this to say just eAll. So when you finish developing, on your web server, you should probably always turn this off. Why? The reason being is that if errors do occur on your page, especially eStrict notices, you don't want your viewers to, or your visitors on your website, to be seeing eStrict notices, nor do you want them to see errors if you've maybe trying to include a file somewhere. For example, if you're trying to include a file somewhere and it can't be found and you're returning an error, what's happening is then they're understanding the structure of your website. So for security reasons, it's probably best to turn error reporting to 0 either on your local or web server when you release this to the public. So if you say have paid hosting, you might not be able to get access to php.ini. However, you can use a couple of functions to change values, and that's what I'm going to go over just now. So what happens if we want to dynamically update this value inside PHP? Now let's close php.ini and we'll have a look inside here. So what we can actually do is, let's get rid of the outside content as well. What we can actually do is we can specify error reporting either like this. So we can say error reporting 0. I don't think it's working on my installation at the moment. Yeah, let's just get rid of that, see what happens. Yeah, okay, so error reporting 0. You can then change it to say eAll, and then refresh the page, and you can see, oh no, we're not getting that back. Maybe we could. No, okay, so it's not working on my installation just yet. However, you can use error reporting maybe on like a public server. You can also use things like ini set is a great function to update values in your php.ini. So we can say ini set error reporting all. So then, I don't think this is going to work either for my installation, no. But the idea of this is that you are dynamically setting your ini file, or you're just using the error reporting function on its own to change these values. I think with the ini set you don't need to include these, so it's just like that, regardless of whether it still works on mine. No, it doesn't. So that's a bit about error reporting and how you can either produce errors or hide errors from either yourself or the public, and a bit of information about why you should turn it off, as well as some examples of setting this up on the fly.
I'm Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video tutorial on PHP variables for the new Boston. Now, if you've programmed in any other programming languages, you'll know what variables are and you'll understand what they do, that you have to assign values to variables, and that there's different types of variables. Now, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to create variables by assigning values to our standard structure that we use for variables, and then how to echo them out to the browser. So usually in programming languages such as JavaScript, anything like that, you'd have to use a keyword such as var. Then what you'd do is you'd type the name of the variable, and then you'd assign a value to it. So in this case it would be var name equals Alex, and this would be surrounded to show that it's string data. Now same as if you were to say var age equals 21, that would be exactly the same example. However, in PHP we don't really need to use any keywords to define anything. All we really need to do is use our $ notation. All variables start with the $. They can either start with an underscore or a character, an alphanumeric character, so it can be uppercase, it can be lowercase, or in fact it can start with a number, but it can't consist of just a number. So if we were to say create a variable here called text, and we could make that equal to hello world. So the notation that we've used is we've used the $ to start our variable. Notice we haven't specified what type of variable it is. It's not a string. Usually you might have to use a string keyword. We've just used $ text equals, so we're assigning a value to this variable here, and the value that we've assigned is some string data, and that is hello world inside there. Now we could say assign we want to create a variable with a number, so we could type number equals, and without using quotation marks, because if we were to put say a number in here, this is now classed as string data. So if we take it out, you can see that my text editor has turned it red, and we're just dealing with a numeric value, an integer value. As well as integers, you can also use floating values, so you can use decimal points within. So we could have 100.5 for example, but for now I'm just going to work with integers. We also have things like Boolean values, which is equal to true, false, and as equal to this, a Boolean for true would be the same as 1. It just means that something's true, so we can use that later on when we work with if statements and things like that. So we've got our variables, but how are we going to output them? Now there's one easy way to output variables, and that's just to put an echo straight in the middle. So what, or at the start, sorry. So what we're doing, let's just add a full stop in here. What we're doing is we're echoing out essentially the assignment of the text to the variable, and here we're echoing out the assignment of this integer to this variable, but this will work. So if we have a look and refresh, you can see that we've got hello world and then the number 100 printed. Now this is not a great way to do things, because what we want to do is we want to declare the variables up here and, well, with our assignment, and then here we want to display them to the user. So for example, I could say echo text, and we can refresh our page, and you can see that that's just echoed out our single variable text. So we're just echoing text. Don't forget your line terminator. As well, we can echo number. So if we refresh, we've got 100 there. So we've just basically echoed out a number. Now, as you're programming and you find different uses for storing different things, for example, you might want to take the user's age or take the user's name, you'll find that you will be storing things, you'll be storing string data, and you'll be storing numerical data as well, so integers, floats, things like that. So in actual fact, it's so easy in PHP because you don't need to think about what data you're storing. You just need to use the notation with the $sign, the variable name following the rules, and then just the value to the variable. So you can see that PHP variables are in fact really easy. Hi there, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is another video tutorial for the new Boston. Now in this video I'm going to be talking about concatenation within PHP. Now if you've ever come across the word concatenation, you'll understand what it means, or if you've programmed before, you might understand how to concatenate different variables together, or how to print out things and then concatenate variables in so you can view them in a sentence if you like. Now in PHP it's really simple. Let's start out by creating just a few variables. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable called day, and this is going to be equal to the day of the week. So today it is Thursday, and I'm going to create another variable called let's say date. And this is just going to be simply equal to the day in numerical value. So it's the 31st today. Now down here, if I wanted to say echo out the day and then the date, so eventually I want it to say this, so let's just echo it out so we know what we're doing. Thursday, I could say the date is Thursday 31, just to make things simple. We could eventually faff around with st, but that would use if statements, which is later on. So the date is Thursday the 31st. This is what we want our program to display. We could in fact incorporate the year in as well, so I'm going to say year equals, I'm going to say 2011. Now the reason I'm doing this is, for example, if it was the year 2000, in actual fact it would work. So yeah, okay, we'll keep this as integer data. So the year equals 2011. So we've got a variable called day, we've got a variable called date, and we've got a variable called year. So eventually we want this program to display the date is Thursday the 31st 2011, but we want it to use these variables rather than a predefined set of text that we've written out. So the way we do this is we can either use our double quotation marks, which is going to make life a lot easier for us, or we're going to use singles. Now I'm going to use singles at first because it's a lot better for you to learn with single quotation marks, and then you can go ahead and be lazy and use the doubles if you like. So with the single quotation marks, I'm going to start typing the date is, okay, so I've left a space here on purpose. Now after the last single quotation mark, but before the line terminator, we want to add a full stop. So it's just a single dot on this line. Then what we need to do is just simply address the variable that we want to echo. So this is still all included on the echo line. If we put the day here, it's still going to echo out day, even though we haven't sort of pre-put echo in front of it. So concatenation just basically means we're joining something on to the string that we're already echoing. So the day is day, then we want a space, so I'm going to concatenate on a piece of string data with just a space inside, and I'm going to concatenate on as well with another dot, date, and then I'm going to concatenate on another space, so we're using the full stop and then the space here with the single quotation marks, and then eventually we're going to do year. Now obviously we don't need to concatenate anything else onto the end of that because that is the end of our line. So now we can just preview. Let's have a look in our browser, refresh, and you can see that it says the date is Thursday 31st 2011. Now what if I was to make a change here? So I could say it's Friday the 32nd 2011. I know that's an unrealistic value. We'll go for 30 then, just so you don't get confused. So we could say it's Wednesday. Okay, so it's Wednesday the 30th 2011. Let's refresh, and you can see that's updated itself. Again, the same with the year. This can be changed as well, and it will just simply update the output. So this is the harder but faster way to sort of echo variables within string data as well. Obviously we could also echo things onto the end of this. For example, we might do a strong tag, and then we might put a strong tag just before here. So the way this is going to work is we're echoing out normal text, a bit of HTML just before we declare this within the concatenation. Then we have a space, we have the date, we have a space, we have the year, and then we end with ending the HTML. So let's refresh, and you can see that that's turned bold. So this is the better way to do things, but now let's take for the easy way. So let's echo the date. Oh, in fact, we're using double quotation marks. Now you're going to see how easy it is to do it this way. The date is day, date, year, and that's it. We don't need to concatenate because we're using variables within a string. Now you might think that this will output $year. In actual fact, if we had single quotation marks, you can see what happens. You can see that it's literally outputted the $sign day, the $sign date, the $sign year, when in actual fact we want it to reference these three variables here. So all we do is change these to double quotation marks, and you'll see that that magically updates itself and puts the variables in there for you. So it's totally personal preference. Like I've explained before, single quotation marks are faster. Concatenation gets you used to looking at complex code and understanding what's outputted where. So I'd always recommend using the single quotation marks and the concatenation for each variable. So that's basically concatenating within PHP. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and in this video for the new Boston we are going to be looking at if statements within PHP. Now an if statement is a statement that lets us compare or not compare or evaluate something, whether it's true or false, and act on that. For example, in real life situations you would say if I did this there would be an outcome, or otherwise if I didn't do this there would be another outcome. And we can demonstrate this. I'm going to show you the syntax first of all, and this is just simply if, and then we have two brackets where our statement to be evaluated goes inside here, and then we start a curly bracket, we come down a few lines, and we end a curly bracket. Then what we do is we basically come in and put our statement in here. So for now I'm going to say if 1. Now true. So the way this reads is if 1 echo true. Now 1 by itself is a statement within programming in general that will evaluate to true. It's there, it's 1, it equals 1, it's 1, there's no comparison, it just equals true. Otherwise we echo false. Okay, so we're basically saying if 1 on its own, if this is true, we execute this block here. This is called a block. Otherwise, by using the else keyword, execute this block here. What's highlighted in blue at the moment is a block. So this is how we write it out. You might see it's sometimes written like this. This is a lot of an easier way to read it. If you're new to programming, it doesn't matter how you write it, but generally I write like this. So this block here will be executed if 1 is true, which it is and it always is, and otherwise this block here will be executed. So let's just run this in our browser and see what happens. We're being displayed with the text true because this is true. Now what about if 0? Now you can probably guess that 0 is an automatic false. 1 is true and 0 is false. So in this instance, putting a 0 in, we're evaluating 0. Is 0 true or false? It's false. So we should be displayed with the text false. The same as if we were to write true, this would equal true. And if we were to type in false, this is equal to false. Now this is pretty boring. We want to start making some comparisons inside. So I'm just going to use an example of one of the comparison operators, which is double equals. And this means is equal to. And it looks like this. And either side of it you're going to do your values to compare. So I want to say does 1 equal 1. Now this reads as does 1 or is 1 equal to 1. And because 1 is equal to 1, we're going to be executing this block. If 1 wasn't equal to 1, we'd be executing this block. So let's just run that. And that's true. Now I'm going to change this to does 1 is 1 equal to 2. And obviously that is false. So you can see how this block here, this is called an if-else statement because we're using the keywords if and we're using the keywords else. You can have an if statement just on its own. If it doesn't happen to equal true, we're just in this case not going to output anything because there's no else to tell us what to do otherwise. So now let's just return back to that. Now what we can do is we can start saying things like if, and we can have a variable up here. Let's say we'll say text equals let's say something. So if text equals something, echo true. In this case we will be echoing out true to the screen because it is true. Otherwise echo false. So now what I can do is change this to, let's say, something else. It doesn't equal that, so we're going to be displayed with false. So that is the basic structure and the use of an if statement. We have this is basically called an if-else statement. So we've got if, else, and depending on whether this statement here is evaluated to true or false, we echo out the corresponding block. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, creating this PHP tutorial for the New Boston. Now, we've already looked at an if-else statement, which looks something like this. As this stands, it evaluates to true, so we're echoing out the text true. Now, if I was to start a completely new if statement, let's say I wanted to evaluate a few more things down the line. Now, let's create a number, number 1, and that's going to be equal to 10. Now we can create a number 2, and I'm going to create that also equal to 10. No, we'll just keep number 1. So we'll just keep number itself. So I want to create an if statement to gradually make a few comparisons with this variable. So if I was to say if number equals 10, so this is equal to 10, echo equal to 10. So as it stands, the variable number is equal to 10, therefore this comparison is going to be true, so we're going to be echoing out this text. So let's just test that in our browser quickly. Okay, equal to 10. Now what if I want to say, but hold on a minute, otherwise I want to make another check. So you've seen in my previous examples I've said else, echo, and we could, for example, say not equal to 10, and if I was to change this value here to 11, you'll be displayed with the text not equal to 10 because the variable does not equal 10. But let's scrap this idea of just going straight to else, and I want to say else if. So I'm basically combining if and else to make else if, and then I just do exactly the same structure and I do another block underneath that. So else if, and here what we can do is, before just jumping to else and saying no, this doesn't equal and this is evaluated to false, we can make another comparison and we can do another evaluation. So else if number equals 11. and we can now say equal to 11. Oh, if I can spell it. So equal to 11. Then what we can do is we can say else not equal, for example. So now what we're doing is we're saying, is the number equal to 10? If it is, echo out this text equal to 10. Otherwise, is this text equal to 11? And if so, we echo out the text equal to 11. Now remember, before when I changed this to 11, it said not equal. But now I've changed it to 11, this will be evaluated to true, or this here in particular will be evaluated to true, therefore this is going to be executed. So let's refresh the page, equal to 11. Again, we can change this up here back to 10, so it's performing this check here, and we refresh, equal to 10. But if we were to go as high as 12, we haven't got a check here for it to be equal to 12, therefore not equal. So this is basically, in a nutshell, if-else statements, and they're useful for just making a few more checks before you want to completely say nope, nothing's equal, else, and give the last alternative block to execute. This is Alex from PHP Academy, and this is a PHP tutorial for the New Boston. In this video I'm going to be talking to you about assignment operators. Now, assignment operators in PHP, we've already seen a few. For example, if I was to say number 1 equals 10, we've already used an assignment operator here. This is the is assigning a value of 10 to this variable. So it's not is equal to, we're not comparing anything, that's a comparison operator. We are assigning this value. Now, what happens if I wanted to, let's create another variable, say number 2 equals 5. Now, if I wanted to, for example, create a result, and I wanted this to equal 10, oh no, I wanted this to equal number 1 plus 2, and here I'm trying to achieve the result 12. In fact, let's get rid of this number 2 now so we don't confuse ourselves. So we've got number 1, we're assigning the value of 10 to this. Now we're assigning the value a value to result, and this value is 10 plus 2. Now, how can we use this in shorthand? We've already seen this basic assignment operator here. However, there is a lot quicker way to do this, and this would be to say number 1 plus equals 2. Now what this is saying in plain English is number 1, so we're saying 10 equals 10 plus 2. So we're taking the value and just adding on 2 rather than creating it as a long long line of code, sorry. So let's refresh this and we see that we've got, oh no, we need to echo it out. So echo number 1. So we're assigning up here, we're performing an operation on here, but we are reassigning a value, and then we're echoing out the value here. So let's refresh. And you see we've got the value 12. So we've used plus equals, as opposed to, we could say number 1 equals number 1 plus 2. But removing the whole of this, we can just say plus equals. So that's a lot easier way to demonstrate that. Now, for example, we could use the same thing with minus equals. So let's refresh that, and we're left with the value 8. So we're doing exactly the same thing. We're saying number 1 equals number 1 minus 2, but instead we're doing minus equals. So it's an easy shorthand version to do things. We can do the same as well as multiply, so here we'll receive the result 20, and that works. And the same with divide as well, you can use exactly the same thing. So we're going to say 10 divided by 2, and that's going to be equal to 5. You can also do the modulus, so in this case we're going to be left with 0 because there's no remainder. However, if we were to change this to 3, we get the remainder 1. So you can see how already we're shorthanding the code. It's a lot easier to program, it's a lot quicker to program, and as far as looking at it as a whole, it's as long as you learn the way it looks and convert it into plain English in your mind well enough, you'll understand it straight away. So you can just say, yeah, that's number 1 equals number 1 plus 2. Now we can also use concatenation with the equals. We've already looked at concatenation in some of the past videos, but what we can do is we can work with string data. So I'm going to say text equals hello. Now what if I wanted to concatenate some text onto this to make it say hello world? Obviously this is a useless example, but now you'll get the feel of how we can concatenate on easily. All I need to do is I need to say text dot, remember we use dot for concatenation, dot equals, I'm going to put a space in there and say world. So let's just comment this line out. As it stands, we refresh the page. Oh, remember to echo out the text down here. We refresh the page and we get the text hello. Now if we bring this back into play just by taking out that comment there, we're saying text equals text, and then we're concatenating this on. So it's the same as saying well, it's the same as basically having this up here like that. Obviously, like I said, a useless example, but it shows you how it can be done. And later on, when you're obviously programming complex programs, this is useful. So if we refresh, we get that hello world. So these are basic examples of assignment operators and how we assign different values to other variables or plain text itself in PHP. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is another video tutorial in PHP for the new Boston. In this video I'm going to be talking on the subject of operators, but we're going to be using comparison operators, and I'm going to be showing you how they work and what they're useful for. Now let's go back to our previous examples of having variables. I'm going to say 10, and number 2 I'm going to make that equal to 9. Now comparison operators are basically when we compare one or more values. We can compare any amount of values we want. In this example we're going to be comparing sort of a maximum of 3 values just to demonstrate, but without going too far over time. Now for this example we're going to be using if statements. So if you haven't already learned about if statements, go to the video about if statements and have a look at that so you can get a general idea. But as far as this is concerned, I'm going to set up an if statement with my block just under here as well. So I've got the block of data that's going to be executed here if this equals true. Now remember, this inside here evaluates to either true or false. Therefore if I was to say if true, I'm going to echo out inside, so this is inside our block. I'm going to refresh and that says inside. However, if I was to change this to false and I refresh, it's not going to echo anything out because this has evaluated automatically to false. I've used the false keyword. Now it's the same as if I was to do 1 equals 1. Now you probably noticed I've just put 2 equal signs in there. Now remember, when we assign values we use a single equal sign. However, when we use double equal sign, we compare. So we're comparing the number 1 to the number 1. Now the number 1 is equal to the number 1. This means is equal to, so we're asking the question, is 1 equal to 1? And this statement will evaluate to true. So we are going to echo out the text inside. So let's refresh inside. Now we can say if does 1 equal 2? It doesn't, so we're not going to echo this text out. Now the other comparison operators, sorry, are not equal to. So what we do is we use an exclamation mark and then we still use a single equal sign. So we've got 2 characters here. We've got an exclamation mark and a single equal sign, and this in plain English reads to does 1 or doesn't 1 equal 2, or does this not equal this? Now the answer is yes, it doesn't. 1 doesn't equal 2, so therefore this is going to evaluate to true. So 1 doesn't equal 2, therefore we're going to echo out the text inside. Now if we change this back to a 1, does 1 not equal 1? Well, 1 does equal 1, so this is going to evaluate to false. So let's refresh and we don't echo the text out. So now what we can do is start working with things like greater than and greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So for example, just to let you know beforehand, this can also be written like this. So we've got sort of conflicting less than and greater than signs. So 1 is equal to 1, so we're not displaying anything. However, if we change this back to 2, as I've shown in the previous example, it's still working. So it can be this or this. It's entirely up to you. I always prefer this. I just think it's a lot easier to read and process in your mind, because we tend to think of this as sort of maybe perhaps a negative thing, like we're exclaiming something, so doesn't equal to, it's just a lot easier to read. So let's go on to incorporating our variables up here that I've assigned earlier into this if statement. Now I want to say, is number 1 greater than number 2? So in here I'm going to change this text, so I'm going to say either yes or no. So yes is going to be our text, we're echoing out, otherwise echo no. So we're using an if-else statement now. So if number 1 is greater than number 2, we say yes, otherwise we say no. So obviously in this case, number 1 is equal to 10 and number 2 is equal to 9, so number 1 is bigger than number 2, so, or greater than in real terms. So we're echoing out the text yes. Now if I was to change this to smaller than, so is or less than, is number 1 less than number 2? It's not, so this statement here is going to evaluate to false, and we say no, it's not. So that's the text we echo out to the screen. Now what we can also do is we can say, is number 1 greater than or equal to? Now if we just left this as greater than and we had 10 and 10, 10 isn't greater than 10, it's equal to 10. So this is still going to evaluate as false. So we're reading, is 10 greater than 10? And the answer is of course no. It stays as no. However, if we incorporate an equal sign in, remember when we did the not equals, we're incorporating the equal sign. This now reads, is number 10 greater than or equal to number 2? And in fact this statement is going to evaluate to true, because 10 isn't greater than but it is equal to. So we get the text yes echoed, and we can do exactly the same with less than or equal to. We're still going to be receiving the value yes, because it is still equal to. As well, if we were to put this as 2, this is now smaller than, it's not equal to, but it is smaller than, so when we do refresh we still get the value yes echoed out. Okay, so now these are the comparison operators. We're comparing two different numbers or two different variables. As it stands, this may as well read obviously 2 and 10, because we're just replacing the variables inside here. But however simple they may seem, they are extremely useful. You'll probably find yourself using the double equals a lot if you're creating code. For example, if a user was to submit a password through a form, you may want to check if their password is equal to maybe a preset password or a password stored in the database. And therefore what we'd do is we'd do something like, if we were to have a preset password, I'm going to set my password up here to password, so obviously quite a basic password, and I might say if password, so it helps if you read it out as English, if password equals password, then we echo correct, otherwise, so else, echo incorrect. So the way we read this is in English would be password, the variable password equals password. This is the password that needs to be matched. Now we say if the password, so the password up here, is equal to password, correct, otherwise incorrect. So refresh, at the moment it's correct. However, if we were to change this to something else, it's incorrect. So you can see how on a daily basis this could come into great use, and these comparison operators can help you operate your program really well. Hi there, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video for the New Boston. In this video I'm going to be talking about mathematical or arithmetic operators inside PHP. Now, what we mean by arithmetic operators, if you're a mathematician, if you know anything about maths, you'll understand that these are plus, minus, multiplication and divide. In PHP we also use modulus, which you may have heard of. We use an increment and a decrement. Now let me just talk you through each one of these. Addition, subtraction, multiplication and division are easy. Modulus is where you take two numbers, for example 3 and 10, and we give a remainder. So we say 10 divided by 3 is going to be 3, and then that's a remainder 1. So a modulus of 10 and 3, or 3 and 10, would equal 1. An increment is simply increment a value by 1, and a decrement is simply decreasing a value by 1. So these are more PHP based in terms of the symbols, as well as the multiplication and the division. So let's just get rid of this and we'll go through it. So the first thing we're going to do as an example is we're going to take two numbers, and these are going to be inside variables. In fact, in actual fact, first what we could do is we could create a variable called sum, and we could equal that to a number, and then we need to add, say, or multiply or subtract another number from it. So I'm going to say 10, and from this I'm going to add 20. Remember your line terminator at the end. So all I've simply done is straight away just put a number in there with no quotation marks around it. I've used the plus symbol and I've added that to another number. So now what we can do is we can either type echo here, which I wouldn't recommend, or we could come down and echo out the value of sum, remembering your line terminator. So what we need to do now is preview this in our browser to see if we retrieve the result we want, which should be 30. So sum should now at this point of the program be equal to 30, and then what we can do is echo the result by just echoing out the variable sum. Okay, so let's just refresh, and you can see we've got the value 30 here. Now this is exactly the same with the minus operator. So at this point the value of sum is going to equal minus 10. So let's just double check that works by refreshing in our browser. You can see that it's equal to minus 10. So you've already seen an example of variables, but now we've automatically, this variable has become a minus figure. So everything's very easy to work with. We won't run into too many errors. We can also obviously do multiplication, so we can do 10 times 20. If we refresh in the browser we get the result of 200, which is what we expect, and that's obviously using an asterisk. We can also use our forward slash for division, so 10 divided by 20, and we're going to receive the result 0.5. So these are basic arithmetic operators. What would be a lot neater and easier in this case, especially in larger programs, would be to have two variables. So we can have number 1, and I'm going to make that say 100. Let's just get rid of this line here and this line here. So we're starting with one variable, number 1, and a number 2 that's going to be called well, that's going to be equal to, let's just say 50. And then I'm going to create another variable called number 3, and I'm going to equal that to 2. So now what I can do is I can start to create a long constructed mathematical operation, if you like, with this. Now there's a few notes to point out, because what we want to do is we want to, as with standard maths, put some operations, some of these mathematical operations as a priority. So for example, if I was to create a new variable called result, and I was going to say number 1 added to number 2, and I want to divide the whole of this by 2. So all I can do is say divide number 3. So what this is actually reading out as is 100, because our variable number 1 is equal to 100, added to number 2, so our variable number 2 is equal to 50, and we're going to divide this by variable number 3, which is equal to 2. Now in actual fact, the way this program or this result is going to work is it's going to perform this that I've selected in blue first, then it's going to add number 1. So if we think about this reading it as a human, we might say number 1 add number 2. That's going to be 150. And that's going to be divided by number 3, which is the value of 2. So we should receive the result 75. Now let's preview this in our browser. We haven't echoed it out, so echo result, that's probably the most important part. So refresh. We're actually retrieving the result 125, and the reason for this is we're performing the operation number 2 divided by number 3. So that's 50 divided by 2, which is 25, and then we're adding 100, so we're receiving the result 125. Now, as with normal mathematical operations, the way we go around this is we prioritize different parts of our sum. So we're going to enclose this in brackets, so everything in brackets is going to be happen first, and then we're going to divide by number 3. So you can see by just the addition of these brackets, we refresh and we receive the result 75. Now let's move on to the modulus, and we can see how this works. So let's have a number 1, and we'll have that as 10, and we'll have number 2, and that's going to equal 3. Now we're going to have our result equal to number 1. Now the way we use a modulus is with the percentage sign. So we're saying number 1 mod number 2. So that's 10 mod 3, and with a result we should receive number 1. So we're basically saying what is the remainder of 10 divided by 3, and the remainder is 1. So this is useful in some aspects of development when you need to come up with the remainder of a number for various different reasons, but you'll probably experience that a bit later on. Now let's just take away all our variables except our number 1. What I want to do is I want to create on a new line, say number 1 plus plus. Now if we were to echo out number 1 now, we've actually incremented number 1 by 1. We don't need to assign this to anything, we can just say number 1 plus plus, and I'll explain the reason for that in a minute. You can see that we've got, echo number 1, sorry. So if we refresh, we've got 11. Now why do we need to create this command or this variable increment on its own? The reason for that is this is a shorthand notation of number 1 equals number 1 plus 1. So if we refresh, we've got exactly the same result. However, number 1 plus plus is just a quicker way of doing that. Now the times that you need to use this increment, and of course we can do decrement as well, which is 2 minus signs as opposed to 2 plus signs, that will give us the result of 9, so we've decremented by 1, and then we'll decrease by 1. The reason we do this is because in loops sometimes we need to keep track of how many times the loop has run. So we use, say, a figure, we might use a variable called I or a variable called n or anything really, but we want to increment to each time the loop happens, and doing this is just a much quicker way of, instead of writing number 1 equals number 1 plus 1. Obviously if you wanted to increment it by 5 you would do it this way, so if we refresh that would then read 15. But these are basically the standard operators that you're probably going to use on a day-to-day basis if you're programming. Perhaps not the modulus, but particularly the basic sums, the addition, the subtraction, multiplication, division, and the increment, and perhaps the decrement. Hello, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video tutorial for the New Boston. In this video I'm going to be talking about logical operators. Now we've already seen examples of comparison operators, arithmetic operators, and assignment operators. So we've assigned variables, we've compared them. Now what happens if we want to use a bit of logic to maybe say want to check a few variables at once if they compare to different values? Now the best way to explain this is to create an example. So if I was to create a number here, number 1 equals 10. Now what I want to do is I want to create an if statement here with block, And inside here I want to say number 1 greater than or equal to 10. Now echoing out this would be true, so we've evaluated this to true. Number 1 is equal to 10, so when we refresh in our browser we get true echoed out. However, let's say we want to check at say an upper and a lower bounds. We've already seen examples like this where we've simply made a comparison check, but let's apply some logic into this. I'm going to create a variable called upper, and this is going to be 1000, and my lower is going to be 500. Ooh, make sure we assign that there. My lower limit is going to be 500. Now what I want to do is I want to, let's change this text to let's say OK. I want to test whether a specific number supplied, which could be up here, is equal or is between 1000 and 500. So I want this number to be either 1000, 500, or somewhere in between. So it could be 505, or it could be 999.9. It could be 1000, it could be 500, but it can't be under 500, so it can't be 497, or it can't be 1001, for example. So this number at the moment is 1. Let's put it in within our boundaries. So I'm going to say 654, which is between 500 and 1000. Now how are we going to make this check? Now in PHP we have logical operators. We have and, we have or we have not. Now I'm not going to discuss the not in this tutorial in depth. I might come into it, but we're definitely going to be discussing the and or the or. Now and or can be written in a few ways. We can write and like this with a double ampersand symbol, or we can write it and. You can see it's turned blue as well. It doesn't have to be in capitals, but it just makes everything easier to see. Or is either two vertical lines, they're also known as pipes, so they're on your keyboard, or you can just simply, you probably guessed, write or. So we need to think logically, and we need to think in plain English a lot of the time whenever we program anything. So I need to say, is this number greater than or equal to 500, which is the lower variable, and is it less than or equal to upper? So you probably guessed. Let's start writing this out and speaking in English as we go. So I'm going to say if number is greater than or equal to lower, and, so let's space this out a bit, and number is less than or equal to upper. So it has to be greater than or equal to 500, and it has to be less than or equal to 1000. So in this case we'll echo out OK if that's the case. So let's refresh and see what happens. Okay, we're left with the, well, we're printing out or echoing out OK. So what happens if we now change this number to 999.999, for example? Let's refresh. We're still being produced in our browser with OK. It's still telling us it's OK. So this statement is still evaluating to true. Now what happens if we say, let's just say 10,000, okay? So, or 10,500. This is obviously greater than 1,000, so we should be left with the alternative, which will be to display nothing because we don't have our else on the end. So if we refresh, you can see nothing's displayed. So this has worked really, really well. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to use a bit of concatenation inside here, and I'm going to say number must be between space lower, and then I'm going to concatenate on some text and with a space either side, and upper. Okay, so this is going to read number must be between lower and upper. In fact, no, that needs to go in our else part, obviously, because if that doesn't evaluate to true, otherwise OK. Okay, so the way it works is if this evaluates to true, we're saying OK. Otherwise, we're telling the user the lower and the upper bounds of the number. So if we refresh so far, number must be between 500 and 1000. If we pop this straight in the middle and say 750, it's telling us that it's OK. So let's go and say like a minus 1000, minus 100, for example. Number must be between 500 and 1000. And then we can do the inclusive numbers as well. So if it's 500, it's going to be still OK. Let's say we were to take the equals out of there. Remember, it now doesn't equal, so it's working. So maybe we could put a little message on the end of here saying inclusive. Oh, inclusive. Okay, so now what we're going to do is get rid of this example, and what we're going to do is we're going to have our number. We're going to have a can be 1 equals 2, and we're going to have can be 2 equals 4. So I want this number here to equal either 2 or 4. So how am I going to do this? I'm going to start up an if statement, and inside here we're going to write if. So we're saying if number equals, remember we're saying is equal to, can be 1, or, so remember our double pipe, number equals can be 2. So if it equals either 2 or 4, we're going to echo OK. So let's check that. At the moment it's 500, nothing's displayed. So we can write maybe an else here, echo not OK. So we're saying not OK. Now if this was to equal 2, that's fine. If it was to equal 4, that's fine. If it was to equal, say, 6, that's not fine, because it doesn't equal the things we've specified. Now what we can do is we can change this whole thing around, and I can say not, I can say not. We use this exclamation mark to say not. So if this is not true, or this isn't true, then it's OK. So at the moment this isn't true, or this isn't true, so it is OK. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's 2. So if the number doesn't equal, then it's not true. So refresh, and oh, maybe we need to okay, so yeah, obviously these need to be in brackets, because what we're doing is we're evaluating the statement as a whole. This is a whole here, and this is a whole just here. So let's refresh, and at the moment it's OK. So it doesn't equal, the number doesn't equal 2. It does equal 2, so it's OK. If we were to do 4 and refresh, that's OK as well. But if it's anything else other than 2 and 4, because we've introduced this not, we're saying oh, and at this point we need to make sure this is and. So okay, I'm confused in my own logic. What we're doing is we're saying OK if the number is not 2 and if it's not 4. So take a look at this code and try and sort of understand it, but the logic of it, especially if you speak it in sort of an English or you say it to yourself, you'll understand it a lot better. But that is basically logical operators.